We are grateful that all of you who are here this morning. We have some visitors with us. We are glad that you are here to worship God with us. Before I get into the lesson, just a quick note about a week from tomorrow begins our Vacation Bible School, and we're going to be talking about pleasing God, this being my joy, that even a child could do it. We're going to look at several examples of those who are younger in years, but who demonstrated, who exemplified great attitudes of mind and actions in their lives. I would encourage you to really set the priority. I know that the kids look forward to this, and I hope that the adults will set the priority to bring the children, but not just the children. These classes are going to be, or there will be classes for adults as well, for middle school, high school class as well, those who are a little bit older in age. These same lessons apply, and if you have an opportunity, I would encourage you to come as well to enjoy that. In talking to people about Jesus Christ, you find a variety of concepts of who Jesus is. I remember talking to a man. He was from India, very well educated. He was a clinical psychologist. And in the course of our discussion, I asked him, what do you think of Jesus? Who do you think Jesus was? He thought for a minute and he said, well, I believe that Jesus was a great leader, a religious leader, like Buddha or Muhammad. Spoke to another man. Who do you think Jesus was? And he said, well, I believe that he was just a very good man. He was an honorable man who walked on the face of the earth. Talked to another individual who is of Jewish descent, and he said, well, I believe Jesus was a prophet, was a good man, sort of like Isaiah, or maybe Jeremiah. A lot of different ideas about who Jesus is, who Jesus was. Who would you say Jesus was, Jesus is? For us to get a good concept of who Jesus was, I think it's important for us to look at who Jesus claimed to be. In fact, as you read through the Bible, particularly the book of John, if you would open up your Bibles to the book of John, the 6th chapter. We're going to begin there in just a couple of minutes. When you look at the Gospel of John, you find that Jesus made, as I count them, 36 claims about himself. If we're going to be intellectually honest about our understanding of Jesus, if we're going to truly understand who he is it not really important for us to see who he claims to be and whether or not he lives up to those claims? What I would like for us to do in our lesson this morning is to not look at all 36 of the claims of Jesus, but to categorize them a little bit and look at some of the major claims that Jesus made for himself, first in his relationship to God, and secondly in his relationship to man. And at the end of that, we are going to have to come to a conclusion of who we believe Jesus was. First, in his relationship to God. Jesus claimed to be from heaven. Here in the book of John, the 6th chapter, Jesus makes that claim. And it's an important claim. When we meet someone, usually for the first time, we greet them, and a lot of times we'll say our name, and we want to know what their name is. And perhaps the first question that comes out of our mouth is, where are you from? And what answer they give is going to, well, we kind of have ideas about people from different places. They might say, well, I'm from Chicago. Well, that brings up something in our minds about folks that are from Chicago. Or I'm from Iran. Or I'm from Sudan, or I'm from Nigeria, or I'm from Australia, or I'm from Birmingham, or I'm from wherever they're from. We kind of have an idea in our mind. We kind of put a context around them of who they are. Where did Jesus say he was from? John chapter 6, we find, beginning with verse 30. Jesus having a conversation with the Jews, and they said to him, in verse 30, what sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. They were trying to figure out who Jesus was, and so they wanted Jesus to do something, to do some sign in order to believe that He was, in fact, who He was claiming to be. And they brought up Moses. They thought Moses was a great leader, and truly he was, and that Moses had given them bread out of heaven. Moses had given them manna. Now, in the context of John chapter 6, Jesus had just fed 5,000, and they are coming to follow Him, and He's saying some things that they're not quite understanding, and they are looking for another meal, and then another meal, and then another meal, another meal. Moses, this great leader, gave us bread out of heaven. What are you going to give us? What sign are you going to do? Well, Jesus needs to, again, introduce Himself, help them to understand who He is. First, verse 32, He has to correct them. He says, Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you bread from heaven, but my Father gives you true bread from heaven. So first He corrects them, saying that the source of that bread was not really Moses, it was the Father who gave the bread from heaven. But did you notice the change of the tenses of the verbs? He goes from the past tense to the present tense. Notice that he does not say, again, verse 32, most assuredly, I say to you, Moses did, past tense, not give you bread from heaven, but my Father gave you, or gave our fathers, true bread from heaven. He doesn't stay in the past tense. He switches to the present tense. Moses did not, but my Father gives you true bread from heaven. Verse 33, for the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. So this is present tense to the Jews in the first century, and it's not a piece of bread, a piece of manna that they were going to put in their mouths. It was a person. The bread that has come down, and notice where it is from heaven, is He. It's a person that is going to come down from heaven that gives life to the world. Verse 34, they said to Him, Lord, give us this bread always. We want to have this bread that's come down from heaven. Jesus says in verse 35, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. Jesus identifies Himself as the one in a subtle way, but nonetheless in a very strong way, that He is the one who has come down from heaven. If you had asked Jesus when you met Him, well, Jesus, where are you from? Jesus would say, I'm from heaven. Well, this confused the Jews of His day. Verse 41, the Jews murmured against Him because He said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that He says, I have come down from heaven? They knew who His parents were. They knew that He was perhaps born in Bethlehem, but that He was raised in Nazareth. They knew where He was from. What does it mean that Jesus is from heaven? Well, He's trying to help us to understand His relationship with God. Muhammad never said this about himself. Buddha never said this about himself. Jesus is not in the same category as those religious leaders. Jesus' claims are greater than that. He is from heaven. He also claims to reveal God. In the book of John, the first chapter, and verse 18, now this is not actually something that is said by Jesus, but it is something said about Him, but it certainly gives context to what we're going to look at in chapter 14. In John chapter 1 and verse 18, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, He has declared Him. The only begotten Son. And notice even in this verse that there's an interesting change of tenses of the verbs. He says in verse 18 that this only begotten Son who is in the bosom of the Father. That's why I had trouble at the very beginning of the lesson saying, who do you believe Jesus was and who do you believe Jesus is? The reason why I had trouble with that is that Jesus wasn't just was. Jesus is. He's alive again. And it's hard for us to talk about him only in the past tense. And it was hard for John when he's writing this letter, perhaps about 95 AD or so, Jesus already having died on the cross several years before this. But it's not just a past tense Jesus. Jesus, he says, is in the bosom of the Father. But the very end of the verse he says, he has, past tense, he has declared him. He has exegeted him. He has exposed him. He has given us insights into God that no one else can. And the reason is because he is the only begotten of the Father. He is the only begotten Son. Now let's look at chapter 14 and look at the claim that Jesus makes concerning his intimate relationship with the Father. John chapter 14, beginning with verse 7. Jesus said, "If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. And from now on you know him and have seen him." Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us." Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So now that you say, 'Show us the Father,' do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father in me? The words that I speak to you, I do not speak of my own authority, but my Father who dwells in me does the works." Jesus is making this connection between himself. Now, there would be some who would say, when thinking and talking about who Jesus is in their mind, say that Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit are all one. There are oneness believers, believe that they're all the same being. But Jesus is making a distinction between himself and the Father. He is not the Father is not him, but there is certainly a unity among Jesus and the Father. There is a oneness of purpose between Jesus and the Father. So that when you see Jesus, Jesus says, you see the Father. When you hear my words, you hear the words of the Father. When you see my works, you see the works of the Father. And he says in verse 6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Yes, he is in a very real sense, in a very special sense, revealing to the world the Father, revealing to the world God. And the reason is because he is the only begotten of the Father. The reason is because he is from heaven. The reason is because he is God himself. You know, we might talk to someone, and perhaps you, for example, speak to me, and you observe my actions, and you observe my character, and you observe my language, the way I speak, and mannerisms that I have. And you might actually get a very good impression or a very good sense of who my dad is. You know, Robert Archer, who lives in Texas, even though you've never personally met him, because I'm a lot like my dad, and I talk a lot like my dad, and I act a lot like my dad. Now, I can't really say that we are as unified as the Son of God and the Father, but nonetheless, you can get a very good idea. I reveal my Father in a very practical way, and Jesus reveals God, revealed God to the world in a way that no man ever can. Just simple words cannot do. Because when we saw Jesus interacting with people, when you saw him interacting with the poor and the rich and the hypocritical and the sincere, when you saw his anger and when you saw his joy, you saw a reflection of God. You saw a reflection of the Father, because Jesus revealed God. Jesus also claimed to be eternal in his being. In John chapter 8, beginning with verse 51, Jesus talking to the Jews, makes a claim in verse 51 when he said, "Most assuredly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death." Very strong claim that Jesus made there. Great deal of authority, great deal of power. Then the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead and the prophets, and you say, if anyone keeps my words, he shall never taste death. Of course, Abraham was the father of the Jews, and if the father of the Jews, the one who brought about this nation of the Jews that Jesus was a part of, if he, in his words, a great man although he was, is dead, and the prophets in their words, they are dead as well, how can you say, if you abide in my words, you are not going to taste of death? Verse 53, are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets are dead? Whom do you make yourself out to be? Who are you claiming to be? They are asking. Jesus said, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet you have not known him, but I have known him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Again, you look at the tenses of the verbs, and this is a difficult statement that Jesus makes here about Abraham. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And certainly an implication of this is that when someone dies, it doesn't mean that they cease to exist. When someone dies, their spirit continues on. It goes to a waiting place, and they are still able to be aware of what's going on the earth. And apparently Abraham was able to do that. But Jesus has a stronger point to make to them than just that. Verse 57, the Jews said to him, are you not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham even existed, and Abraham had been dead for, at this time, about 2,100 years. 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years Abraham has been dead. And Jesus said, before he existed on the earth, 2,100 years before this time, I am. He existed before Abraham. Even though he was not physically more than 50 years old. In fact, he was about 33 years old. Jesus was claiming something for himself in his relationship to God, and that is that he was eternal in his nature. Now, there are those who have churches who believe that Jesus Christ was a created being, that he was an exalted angel. But Jesus himself, if we're going to be honest, if we are going to believe Jesus, we cannot define Jesus for ourselves. We have to be honest with who we deal with when we're dealing with Jesus and look at who he claims to be and either take those claims as a package deal and accept them, or else we reject them as Jesus being a liar. Jesus says, I am, connecting himself with the great record that we have of Moses on Mount Sinai when God said, I am that I am. Jesus is eternal. Jesus is God. And we look specifically at the claim of Jesus to be the Son of God. In John chapter 5, we find that Jesus heals a paralytic man, and there was some discussion about that afterward with those that were in opposition to him, that were critical of him. Jesus says, we'll pick up the reading here in verse 19 of John chapter 5. Jesus answered and said to them, most assuredly I say to you. Did you notice how many times Jesus says that, most assuredly? He wants to, he's not just making suggestions here. He's not just giving an opinion here. He's not just, well, I'm a little doubtful about this, but I would like for you to take this into your consideration. Jesus over and over again, most assuredly I say to you. We continue there in verse 19. The Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son does in like manner. There is this relationship that Jesus as Son has with the Father, has with God the Father, that is developed in the life of Christ. And the Old Testament mentions God being Father, but the New Testament explores it and reveals it, and particularly in the relationship that Jesus has with the Father. What the Father does, the Son does as well. Verse 20, for the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show him greater works than these, and you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will. Now he's moving from just when you see me, you've seen the Father, what the Father does, I do, to the Father has power, authority to raise the dead, and I do too, Jesus says. He's putting himself on an equality with God. We continue here in verse 22. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son. In fact, Jesus is going to place himself, as far as judgment, above the Father. Now, it's a position that's given to him by the Father, but he is the one that is going to, on the judgment day, Jesus is the one that is going to judge the world. Verse 23, that all should honor the Son. This is the reason why the Father does this. Just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Most assuredly, he says it again, I say to you, he who hears my words and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death unto life. That's why Jesus came, to save our souls, to give us life. And if we believe in his word, if we believe in him, then we will be able to have that life. Verse 25, most assuredly, he starts again with this assurance here, this strength, this firmness. I say to you, the hour is coming and now is when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Who is the Son of God? Isn't Jesus claiming that for himself, that he was the Son of God? Yes, when Jesus was on the earth, he was a man, but he was also God. By nature, 100% God. Some people say, Jesus, well, he was a good man. He was an honorable man. That does not reach the level of the claim Jesus makes for himself. Jesus Christ claims that he was the Son of God. If Jesus' claims are not true, he is a liar, or he is a lunatic, or he is, in fact, from heaven, revealing God, eternal, and the Son of God. But we turn our attention to his relationship to man. What claims did he make about how we are related to or interact with him? Same chapter, John chapter 5, verses 26 and 27. So after he said this about this position that he's in, he is the one who gives life. The position that he will be in, that he will be judge, and the gift that he can give to us, and that is eternal life, he then continues that in verse 26 by saying, for as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. Same context. He claims to be the Son of God and the Son of Man at the same time. Jesus uses this term, Son of Man, 12 times in the book of John. It is only used one time of someone other than Jesus, and that time they're quoting Jesus. So John emphasizes this fact that Jesus is the Son of Man. So how is it possible for him to be the Son of God and the Son of Man at the same time? I think that's something we're going to scratch our heads about until the day we die. But the fact remains, Jesus makes this claim, he is by nature divinity. He is by nature God. And at the same time, he is by nature. He is 100% man. 100% God and 100% man at the same time. In fact, he says, that's what qualifies me to be the judge of the world. Because I have been a man, I know what it's like to be tempted. No man can stand before my throne on the day of judgment and say, well, you don't know what it's like, Mr. Judge. You don't know what it's like to live my life on this earth. You don't know how hard it is. You don't know what it's like to be in the flesh and have these temptations like me. No one can say that to the Son of Man, because he has been on this earth, yet he never sinned. In fact, Jesus makes an interesting claim for himself in chapter 1 and verse 51. When he's talking to Nathanael, John chapter 1 and verse 51. Jesus said to him, most assuredly, there again he is beginning with this firmness, I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Now this is an admittedly very difficult passage to understand, but here is my take on this. Here's my interpretation, my understanding of this. You remember in the Old Testament, you had Jacob who has this dream where there is a ladder that goes from heaven and earth, and there are angels ascending and descending, sort of these angels as messengers, bringing the message of God down to man, and ascending, bringing back reports of man back to God. There's this ladder of these angels ascending and descending. Jesus says, you are going to see angels, the message of God, ascending and descending on, not a physical ladder, but on the Son of Man. Jesus has a unique position in the history of the world, being both God and man. He has the ability to reveal God to man in a way that no man can ever do it, because He is God, and He is a man who is able to reveal man to God in a way that no angel could ever do that in the presence of God. He is both God and man. He is the revealer both of God and man at the same time. Jesus Christ, the Son of Man. There were those, particularly the Gnostics, who were even present at the end of the first century into the second century, who denied that Jesus Christ was human, denied that He came in the flesh. Once again, if we're going to be honest with Jesus and going to understand who He is, we can't change it ourselves. We can't pervert it ourselves. We can't make up our own Jesus. Either He is the Jesus that He claims to be, or He is a liar or a lunatic. Another claim Jesus Christ made is that He is the Messiah. In John chapter 4, He's talking to the woman of Samaria at the well. And after an extended conversation, the woman says in verse 25, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When He comes, He will tell us all things. There was an expectation among the Jews, and apparently among the Samaritans as well, that the Messiah was going to come, the Christ would come, and this one that would come would declare all things, reveal all things. He would be the deliverer of the people from slavery, of sin, that He would be the one that would be the servant of God and bring about a time of excellent blessings to mankind. And the Samaritan woman was looking forward to that, apparently. Verse 26, Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am He. Jesus makes the claim to be that Messiah, to be the one to reveal all truth, to be the one to rescue man, to be the one to be the servant of God from heaven. He is the Christ. He is the Messiah. In chapter 10, a little bit later in His ministry, we find Jesus saying, in fact, this is probably about 3 months before His death, in verse 24. The Jews surrounded Him and said to Him, how long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus answered them, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. Jesus tries to be just as plain as He can be. I am the Messiah. I told you this already. The problem is you don't believe me. The problem is you will not accept that. And He gave evidence that He was in fact the Messiah. And Lord willing, in the next few weeks we're going to be looking at this evidence that Jesus gave that these claims are actually real, that He was who He claimed to be. But we'll save that for those lessons. The fact in this is that Jesus says, I am the Messiah. I am the expectation of all of these Old Testament prophecies. I am the Messiah. You know, there are still some who are looking for a Messiah. There are still some who are waiting. When is it going to happen? When is He going to come? There have been through history individuals who seem like a bright light, but then dim very quickly. Jesus says, I am he. He also claims to be king. The book of John, the 18th chapter, when Jesus is on trial, his life is almost over on this earth at this point. He is before Pilate, and Pilate is asking him a series of questions to try to figure out, why are the Jews so angry with you? Why have they brought you before me to put you to death? Verse 33 of John 18. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself on this, or did others tell you this about me?" Jesus is on trial for his life. Pilate is the one who holds the ability to put him to death or to give him deliverance in his hand. Asking this question, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus is not quite plain with this answer when he says, "Are you speaking for yourself on this, or did others tell you about me?" So Pilate continues to question him, verse 35, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Now Jesus is going to be clear here. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here." He gives some very important information to Pilate here. I am not in competition to Rome. I am not here to establish a physical kingdom here on this earth. My kingdom is going to be a spiritual kingdom. Do you know that there are many people in the religious world, many who would call themselves Christians, who are waiting for Jesus to establish a physical kingdom here on the earth? The premillennialists are waiting for Jesus to come back down to this earth and go to Jerusalem and establish a physical kingdom. Why would they distort Jesus in that way? Jesus says, "That's not me. My kingdom is not of this world." Jesus' intent all along was to establish a spiritual kingdom. In fact, he's accomplished that. Established a spiritual kingdom made up of citizens and of this spiritual kingdom, those who are Christians, those who are followers of his will. Verse 37, Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" So let's be even clearer here. Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." As a matter of fact, Jesus is king right now. Remember in Matthew chapter 28, after the resurrection of Jesus, in verse 18 it says, "All authority has been given to him in heaven and on earth." Jesus is king. Jesus says, "That's the reason why I was born. That's the reason why I came into this world, not to establish some physical kingdom on the earth." That was never the intent of Jesus, never the plan of God, but to establish a spiritual kingdom where the inhabitants of that kingdom might be able to share in the greatest spiritual blessings in the history of the world. And that's what we have in Jesus Christ today in his kingdom. Jesus Christ is king. So, what do you think about Jesus? Who was Jesus? As we've tried to emphasize in this lesson, if we're going to be intellectually honest, if we are going to struggle with, if we are going to come to a conclusion about who Jesus truly is, we have to be careful not to make up our own Jesus. We have to be careful not to twist things around and modify Jesus to make a Jesus, a Messiah, after our own image. And we see that all throughout the history of mankind, even today, where people who are followers of Jesus are not following Jesus at all. We have to be honest about and look seriously at the claims of Jesus. Do you believe in the claims of Jesus Christ? In his relationship to God, that he was in fact the Son of God, that he was eternal, that he is eternal, that he has revealed the Father. Is he who he claims to be in relationship to man? That he is the Son of Man, that he is the Messiah, that he is King. I believe, and because I believe, it demands all of me be given to him. If you're not a Christian, we would encourage you to recognize who Jesus Christ is and bow before Him and follow Him. If you're not a Christian, we'd encourage you to believe in Jesus, repent of your sins, confess His name before man, and be baptized. Unite with Him in the death, burial, and resurrection so that you might have life, so that you can continue to live by faith. If you've not yet done that, we would encourage you to do that this morning. If you are a Christian and for some reason have rebelled against Jesus, recognize who He is and change. Won't you come while we stand and sing?